A 7-year-old boy covered in bruises arrives at the emergency room holding his baby sister and looking for a doctor. When a nurse asks what happened, the boy's answer about his stepfather's beatings prompts her to immediately call the police. The bathroom mirror reflected a map of violence that 7-year-old Jasper Whitmore had learned to read like a weather forecast. Purple bruises bloomed across his narrow ribs like storm clouds. The fresh ones from 3 nights ago still tender to touch, while older marks had faded to yellow-green reminders of Knox's previous rages. He traced a finger along the edge of a particularly dark bruise just below his left shoulder blade, wincing as the movement sent sharp pain through his torso. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since Knox Ashford's violence had escalated from occasional slaps to systematic beatings that left Jasper struggling to breathe. 6 weeks of learning to muffle his cries with his pillow, of perfecting the art of walking without favoring injured sides, of becoming an expert in the precise shade of concealer that Vivian left scattered across the bathroom counter. Jasper reached for the small tube of foundation, its contents nearly depleted from weeks of covering finger-shaped bruises on his arms and neck. The shade was too light for his skin, but it was better than the alternative. Questions he could not answer. Without putting Luna in danger, he dabbed the makeup carefully over a particularly visible mark on his collarbone, blending it with the practiced efficiency of someone far too young to possess such skills. From the bedroom down the hall came the sound of Luna's morning babbling, her 10-month-old voice creating a soundtrack of innocence that stood in stark contrast to the reality of their Birmingham home. Jasper's chest tightened with the familiar weight of responsibility that had settled there 8 months ago when Knox first walked through their front door. All charm and promises that had fooled everyone except the baby who had cried inconsolably in his presence from the very beginning. The house had been different then. Quieter, yes, with just Jasper and his mother Vivienne managing their modest life in the terraced house on Maple Street. Vivienne had been sad since his father left when Jasper was 4, but she had been present, attentive, protective. The accident at the textile factory changed everything. The injury to her back, the prescription painkillers that started as legitimate medicine and became her escape from a reality too painful to face. Knox had appeared during those dark months, like a predator sensing vulnerability. He brought flowers and takeaway dinners, paid attention to Vivian when she felt invisible, and presented himself as the solution to their financial struggles. Jasper had watched from the stairs as this stranger gradually took over their lives, first with sweet words and small gifts, then with demands and expectations that grew heavier each week. The transformation had been gradual enough that Jasper could not pinpoint exactly when protection became possession, when care became control. Knox's drinking increased as his gambling debts mounted. His patience with Jasper's presence diminished as Vivian's dependency on medication deepened. The verbal criticism came first, sharp words about Jasper being too clingy with his mother, complaints about normal childhood behaviors, constant reminders that he was an unwelcome addition to Knox's vision of their family. The first time Knox struck him, Jasper had been 6 years old and had accidentally spilled juice on Knox's betting slips. The slap across his face had been swift and shocking, followed immediately by Knox's menacing whisper. "Clumsy little accidents like that don't happen again, do they, boy?" Jasper had nodded, cheek stinging, and Knox had smiled. "Good. And we don't worry Mummy with stories about accidents, do we? She has enough problems without you making up tales." From that moment, Jasper understood the rules of their new reality. Knox's violence was swift, strategic, and always accompanied by threats that centered on Luna's safety. "Keep crying and I'll give that baby something to really cry about," had become Knox's favorite warning, delivered in the same tone another adult might use to discuss the weather. The threat was never idle. Knox's eyes, when he looked at Luna, held the same cold calculation Jasper recognized in his own gaze, the assessment of vulnerability and the potential for causing pain. Jasper finished his concealment routine, and pulled. On his school jumper, careful to keep the sleeves long enough to cover the finger-shaped bruises on his upper arms. The fabric felt rough against his tender skin, but he had learned to suppress the automatic flinch that might draw attention. Pain had become a constant companion, as familiar as his own shadow. He made his way to Luna's room, where she sat in her crib, chubby hands wrapped around the rails as she pulled herself to standing. Her face lit up when she saw him, her entire body wiggling with excitement as she reached for him with the complete trust that only babies possessed. Jasper's heart clenched with fierce protectiveness as he lifted her from the crib, noting how she immediately settled against his chest, her small fist curling into his jumper. "Morning, Lunabug," he whispered against her soft brown hair, inhaling the sweet scent that was uniquely hers. Baby shampoo and the faint smell of the lavender, lotion Vivian had used during her brief periods of maternal attention. "Did you sleep well?" Luna babbled a response, her sounds growing more complex each day as she approached her first birthday. Jasper had been tracking her developmental milestones with the dedication of a pediatric nurse, reading library books about infant care when he should have been focusing on his own Year 2 curriculum. He knew she was advanced for her age, pulling to stand at 9 months, saying "ba-ba" with clear intent when she wanted her bottle, showing preferences for specific toys and foods that indicated a strong developing personality. He changed her, nappy with practiced efficiency, talking to her in the soft, steady voice that always calmed her fears. This morning routine had become sacred to him. These few minutes when Luna's needs were simple and his ability to meet them was absolute. Here, in the quiet of her nursery, with morning light filtering through curtains Vivian had hung during her last functional period, Jasper could pretend they were a normal family preparing for a normal day. The illusion shattered as Knox's voice carried up from the kitchen, already slurred despite the early hour. "Where's my bloody coffee? Vivian! Vivian!" The shouting was followed by the crash of something being thrown, a mug, perhaps, or one of the ceramic ornaments that had been wedding gifts from Knox's relatives. Luna's face crumpled at the harsh sounds, her lower lip trembling in the way that always preceded tears. Jasper quickly lifted her, bouncing gently as he'd learned to do, making soft shushing sounds that had become his most practiced skill. "Shh, Lunabug. It's all right. Jazz has got you. Everything's all right." But everything was not all right, and they both knew it. Luna had developed an acute sensitivity to household tension, crying inconsolably when Knox's voice reached certain decibels, refusing to eat when the atmosphere grew too charged with unspoken violence. Jasper had watched her personality shift over the months, the carefree baby laughter becoming rarer, her sleep more fitful, her need for physical comfort from him intensifying as she learned to associate other adults with danger. Jasper carried Luna downstairs, each step measured and careful to avoid the creaks that might draw Knox's attention before he was ready. The kitchen was a disaster zone of the previous night's rage. Broken crockery swept into a corner, alcohol stains on the counters, and the acrid smell of cigarettes smoked down to the filter. Knox sat at the small table, his back to them, shoulders hunched over what appeared to be racing forms from yesterday's newspapers. "You're late," Knox said without turning around, his voice carrying the particular edge that meant his hangover was severe and his mood correspondingly dangerous. "Baby, should have been fed an hour ago." Jasper said nothing, having learned that any response could be interpreted as defiance. Instead, he moved to the cupboard where Luna's formula was kept, balancing her on his hip as he prepared her morning bottle with the precision of a trained caregiver. The routine was calming for both of them, measuring the powder, testing the temperature on his wrist, finding Luna's favorite spot by the window where morning light created patterns on the wall that fascinated her. "Look at that," Jasper whispered, pointing to the dancing shadows created by the neighbor's tree. "The leaves are moving just for you, Lunabug. They're saying good morning." Luna's attention fixed on the patterns, her small hand reaching toward the light as she drank her bottle. These moments of peace were precious because Jasper never knew how long they would last. Knox's moods shifted like weather systems, Calm could become violent with the speed of a summer storm, and Jasper had learned to read the atmospheric pressure of their household with survival-dependent accuracy. Knox's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, and Jasper's body automatically tensed. Every muscle prepared for impact, every nerve ending alert to the possibility of sudden movement. Knox moved to the sink, his movements deliberately loud as he banged dishes and muttered complaints about bloody useless women and worthless freeloaders. "School," Knox said without looking at Jasper. "And don't be filling that teacher's head with stories." Jasper had learned that Knox's most dangerous moments often came wrapped in casual conversation, violence delivered with the mundane predictability of breakfast routines. Jasper finished feeding Luna and handed her to Vivian, who had finally emerged from the bedroom in her dressing gown, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating the world through a pharmaceutical haze. Vivian's prescription routine had evolved over the 8 months of Knox's presence. Pain medication for her back injury supplemented by anxiety tablets, sleeping pills, and antidepressants that left her functioning in a twilight state between consciousness and oblivion. "Mummy needs to rest," Vivian murmured, her words slightly slurred as she accepted Luna with the mechanical motions of routine. "Be good at school, love." There was love in her voice, genuine maternal affection that made Jasper's chest ache with longing for the mother who had existed before Knox, before the accident, before the medications that had become her primary relationship. Sometimes, in brief moments between pills, Vivian's eyes would clear, and she would see her children with devastating clarity. Those moments were almost worse than her absence because they reminded Jasper of what they had lost. Jasper gathered his school bag, checking that his homework was complete despite having worked on it by flashlight under his covers after the previous night's beating. His teacher, Mrs. Penelope Bramwell, had begun to notice his declining performance, his frequent absences, and the way he sometimes winced when sitting down or raising his hand. Yesterday, she had kept him after class to ask if everything was all right at home. "Fine, Mrs. Bramwell," he had answered with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that honesty was a luxury he could not afford. "Everything's fine." But Mrs. Bramwell had looked at him with the sharp attention of an educator who had seen too many children carrying adult burdens. Her questions were gentle but persistent, and Jasper had felt the dangerous temptation to tell someone, anyone, about the reality of their lives. The moment had passed when the school secretary knocked to remind them about the buses, but Jasper knew Mrs. Bramwell's attention had been awakened. The walk to Meadowbrook Primary School took 15 minutes through Birmingham's February cold, past rows of terraced houses that looked identical to his own, but seemed to contain families who laughed over breakfast and said goodbye with hugs instead of threats. Jasper had learned to observe these normal families with the detached interest of an anthropologist, studying their routines and interactions as if they belonged to a different species. He passed the corner shop where Mr. Ahmed always smiled, and asked about school, the bus stop where mothers waited with pushchairs and discussed their weekend plans, the small park where fathers pushed children on swings before work. These glimpses of ordinary life had become simultaneously comforting and painful. Reminders of what childhood was supposed to look like, what families could be when they functioned properly. The most difficult part of his walk was passing Birmingham Children's Hospital, its modern glass facade rising like a beacon of hope and safety that felt impossibly distant from his reality. Jasper had studied that building during school trips, memorizing its location and wondering if the doctors there really could help anyone who walked through their doors. The hospital was exactly 6 blocks from his house, a distance he had measured. During lonely afternoon walks, when Knox's drinking made home too dangerous, and the streets felt safer than his own bedroom. At school, Jasper slipped into his classroom with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that attention often brought pain. His desk was in the 3rd row, far enough from Mrs. Bramwell's direct line of sight to avoid constant scrutiny, but close enough to participate when called upon. He had perfected the art of academic camouflage, performing well enough to avoid concern about his intelligence, poorly enough to explain his occasional absences and lack of concentration. "Good morning, Jasper," Mrs. Bramwell said as he settled into his seat. Her voice carried the particular warmth she reserved for students she worried about, and Jasper felt the familiar spike of anxiety that came with adult attention. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine, Mrs. Bramwell," he replied automatically, the same response he gave to all inquiries about his well-being. "Thank you for asking." But Mrs. Bramwell's eyes lingered on him longer than usual, and Jasper realized she had noticed something. Perhaps the way he had favored his left side while walking to his desk, or the careful way he lowered himself into his chair to avoid aggravating the bruises across his ribs. He forced himself to sit normally, ignoring the sharp pain that movement caused, and opened his mathematics workbook with hands that trembled slightly from the effort of appearing uninjured. The morning lessons passed in a blur of multiplication, tables and reading comprehension, activities that felt surreal when his mind was occupied with survival calculations. How long could he keep concealing the bruises? How much worse would Knox's violence become as his gambling debts increased? How could he protect Luna when he could barely protect himself? During morning break, Jasper sat alone at the edge of the playground, watching other children play games that seemed to belong to a different world. His classmates had stopped inviting him to join their activities months ago, having learned that Jasper's participation was unpredictable. Some days he played with desperate enthusiasm, as if storing up joy for lean times, while other days he sat in silent withdrawal, his body language discouraging any approach. "Jasper?" Mrs. Bramwell had appeared beside him, her voice gentle but concerned. "Would you mind helping me organize the classroom library during lunch? I could use an extra pair of hands." It was not really a request, and they both knew it. Mrs. Bramwell had been creating opportunities to spend time alone with him, her teacher's instincts clearly detecting something amiss, despite his careful performance of normalcy. Jasper nodded, knowing that refusal would only intensify her scrutiny. The afternoon brought more challenges as his body's pain competed with his need to maintain appearances. His ribs ached with every breath, and the bruises on his back made sitting upright an exercise in endurance. When Mrs. Bramwell called him to the whiteboard to solve a mathematics problem, Jasper stood too quickly and immediately regretted the sharp pain that shot through his torso. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Bramwell asked, her attention now fully focused on his obvious discomfort. "Just a bit stiff," Jasper replied, forcing a smile that felt like a betrayal of everything he was experiencing. "I slept funny last night." The lie came easily because he had practiced variations of it dozens of times, but Mrs. Bramwell's expression suggested she was not entirely convinced. She allowed him to return to his seat without further questions, but Jasper could feel her watching him for the remainder of the afternoon, cataloging every wince, every careful movement, every sign that suggested her student was carrying burdens no 7-year-old should bear. The school day ended with Jasper's usual mixture of relief and dread. Relief at having successfully maintained his facade for another 6 hours, dread at returning to a house where Knox's mood would have been fermenting in alcohol and resentment since morning. He walked home slowly, partly because his injuries made faster movement painful, and partly because he was reluctant to face whatever awaited him. The house felt different when he opened the front door, charged with a particular tension that made the air seem thick and dangerous. Knox was in the living room, surrounded by betting slips and empty beer cans, his attention fixed on horse racing results that clearly had not gone in his favor. The television volume was turned up too loud, and Knox's commentary on the races was becoming increasingly violent and profane. "Where have you been?" Knox demanded without looking away from the television. "School ended an hour ago. I helped Mrs. Bramwell with some books," Jasper replied carefully, setting down his school bag and immediately moving toward the stairs where he could check on Luna. "Don't lie to me, boy." Knox's voice carried the particular edge that meant his mood was deteriorating rapidly. "Teachers don't keep kids after school unless there's a problem. What did you tell her?" The question was loaded with threat, and Jasper understood that his answer would determine the severity of whatever punishment. Knox was already planning. He had learned that Knox's violence often followed a predictable pattern, building tension throughout the day, triggered by external frustrations like gambling losses, then focused on Jasper as the most convenient target for release. "Nothing. Knox," Jasper said, using the respectful tone that sometimes diffused dangerous situations. "She just needed help organizing books. I didn't tell her anything." Knox finally turned to look at him, and Jasper saw the familiar coldness in his eyes that preceded violence. Knox's face was flushed from alcohol and anger, his hands clenched into fists that had become all too familiar weapons. The living room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in to trap them together in this moment of inevitable confrontation. "You better not have," Knox said, standing with the deliberate movement of someone trying to appear more sober than they actually were. "Because if I hear that social services have been sniffing around because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, you'll regret the day you were born." The threat hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of previous violence and the promise of worse to come. Jasper stood perfectly still, every instinct screaming at him to run while his rational mind calculated the impossibility of escape. Knox was between him and the front door, and any attempt to reach Luna upstairs would only draw Knox's attention to her vulnerability. From upstairs came the sound of Luna beginning to cry, hungry, tired, or simply sensing the household tension that had become their constant atmosphere. The sound seemed to galvanize Knox, his attention shifting from Jasper to the source of the noise with the predatory focus of someone seeking a new target for his rage. "That baby better shut up," Knox said, his voice dropping to the menacing whisper that was somehow more frightening than his shouting. "I'm not in the mood for crying tonight." Jasper's blood turned to ice at the implication. Knox had never directly threatened Luna before, but the way he looked toward the stairs suggested that his usual boundaries were dissolving under the pressure of mounting debts and increasing desperation. The gambling losses that had fueled today's rage were apparently severe enough to push Knox into new territory of violence. "I'll go settle her," Jasper said quickly, moving toward the stairs with careful speed. "She's probably just hungry." "No," Knox said, his hand shooting out to grab Jasper's arm with bruising force. "You'll stay right here. Let Vivian deal with her own bloody child for once." But they both knew Vivian was beyond dealing with anything. The sound of her medication-induced sleep was audible even from downstairs. The deep, unnatural breathing of someone too heavily sedated to respond to a crying baby. Luna's wails were increasing in volume and desperation, and Jasper felt his protective instincts warring with his survival instincts in a battle that was tearing him apart. Knox's grip on his arm tightened, fingers digging into bruises that were still tender from previous encounters. The pain was immediate and sharp, but Jasper forced himself not to react, knowing that any sign of weakness would only encourage Knox's aggression. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his mind racing through possible scenarios and finding no good options. Luna's crying reached a pitch that seemed to vibrate through the walls, and Knox's face contorted with rage that was becoming uncontrollable. His free hand clenched into a fist, and Jasper realized with crystal clarity that tonight would be different from all the previous nights. Tonight, Knox's violence would not be limited to him alone. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Luna was no longer safe simply by virtue of being too young to provoke Knox's anger. Knox's desperation had reached a level where any source of stress, any reminder of responsibility, any obstacle to his self-pity would become a target. The crying baby upstairs was no longer an innocent bystander, but a potential victim of violence that would destroy her before she ever had a chance to grow up. Jasper looked into Knox's face and saw his own death reflected there, along with Luna's. Not necessarily tonight, but soon. Knox's control was slipping, his boundaries dissolving, his capacity for violence expanding to encompass anyone who reminded him of his own failures. The house that had been their prison was about to become their grave. "Please," Jasper whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. "Please don't hurt her." Knox's smile was cold and predatory, the expression of someone who had just discovered a new source of power. Then you better make sure she stops crying, he said, releasing Jasper's arm with a shove that sent him stumbling toward the stairs. And you better make sure you give me a reason not to go up there myself. The ultimatum was clear, and Jasper understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Knox was no longer content with using Luna as leverage for Jasper's silence. He was prepared to harm her directly, to make her suffer for the simple crime of existing in his world. The protective barrier that had kept Luna safe through months of escalating violence had finally crumbled. Jasper climbed the stairs toward Luna's increasingly desperate cries, his mind already working on calculations that no 7-year-old should have to make. How much money had he hidden in his bedroom? How far could he carry Luna through February streets? How long before Knox's patience ran out completely? As he reached Luna's room and lifted her from her crib, feeling her small body shake with exhaustion and fear, Jasper made a decision that would change everything. Tonight, while Knox drank himself into unconsciousness and Vivian remained lost in her medicated haze, he would take Luna and walk the 6 blocks to Birmingham Children's Hospital. He would tell them the truth, no matter what happened to him afterward. Because Luna deserved a chance to grow up, and that chance was not going to come from staying in this house any longer. The weight of that decision settled over him as he held his baby sister, feeling her gradually calm in his arms. Outside their window. The February afternoon was fading into evening, and Jasper began counting the hours until Knox would be drunk enough to provide their window of escape. Tonight would be the longest night of their lives, but if he could find the courage to carry Luna through those hospital doors, it might also be their last night in hell. The evening hours crawled by with the agonizing slowness of water torture, each minute stretching into eternity as Jasper waited for the household to settle into its nightly routine of dysfunction. Knox remained planted in his living room throne, surrounded by the debris of another day's gambling failures, his consumption of alcohol steady and purposeful as he worked toward the stupor that would eventually claim him. The television blared, horse racing results from tracks across England, each disappointing outcome adding another layer to Knox's mounting rage. Jasper had managed to keep Luna calm through dinner, a meager affair of tinned soup and stale bread that Knox had declared good enough for freeloaders. He fed Luna her pureed vegetables with infinite patience, making airplane noises and silly faces to coax smiles from her, despite the tension that filled their small kitchen like poisonous gas. Every spoonful she accepted felt like a small victory, fuel for the journey that lay ahead of them. Vivian had made a brief appearance during the meal, moving through the kitchen with the careful deliberation of someone navigating the world through a pharmaceutical fog. She had taken her evening dose of medication, a combination of painkillers, anti-anxiety tablets, and sleeping aids that Knox encouraged with the enthusiasm of someone who benefited from her absence. By 8 o'clock, she had retreated to their bedroom, her breathing already taking on the deep, unnatural rhythm that indicated complete unconsciousness until morning. "Bedtime," Knox announced without looking away from the television, his words slightly slurred but carrying absolute authority. "Both of you. I don't want to hear another sound until morning." The command was delivered with the casual brutality that had become Knox's signature, a reminder that their existence in his house was conditional on their invisibility. Jasper nodded silently, lifting Luna from her high chair and carrying her toward the stairs. Her weight felt different tonight, not heavier, but more precious, as if he was carrying not just his baby sister, but their entire future. Luna's bedtime routine had become sacred to Jasper, a series of rituals that provided structure and comfort in their chaotic world. He changed her into clean pajamas, soft cotton decorated with tiny elephants that Vivian had bought during one of her brief periods of maternal engagement. He warmed her evening bottle to the precise temperature she preferred, testing it on his wrist with the expertise of someone who had become her primary caregiver by necessity rather than choice. As Luna drank her bottle, her eyelids growing heavy, with approaching sleep, Jasper studied her face with the intensity of someone memorizing a masterpiece. Her features were becoming more defined each day. Vivian's delicate nose, his own dark eyes, a determined chin that belonged entirely to herself. She was beautiful in the way that all babies were beautiful, but to Jasper she represented something more fundamental: hope, innocence, and the possibility that love could exist even in the darkest circumstances. "Tomorrow will be different, Luna Bug," he whispered against her soft hair, his voice barely audible in the dim nursery. "Tomorrow we'll be somewhere safe, somewhere people will help us." Luna's response was a contented sigh as she finished her bottle, her small body relaxing into the sleepy limpness that indicated complete trust in his care. Jasper placed her in her crib with infinite gentleness, covering her with the hand-knitted blanket that had been a christening gift from Vivian's mother, a grandmother Luna would never meet because Knox had systematically isolated them from all extended family. But instead of leaving Luna to sleep, Jasper settled into the nursing chair beside her crib, positioning himself where he could watch both her peaceful face and the door that led to the hallway. Tonight was different from all the previous nights, charged with the electricity of impending change. Tonight, Knox's threats had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and Jasper knew with crystalline certainty that tomorrow would find them either safe or dead. From downstairs came the sounds of Knox's escalating intoxication, the volume of the television increasing as his coordination decreased, the crash of bottles being knocked over, the muttered curses that grew more violent and incoherent with each passing hour. Jasper had learned to read these audio cues like a meteorologist tracking storm systems, predicting the intensity and duration of Knox's rages based on the rhythm and frequency of his outbursts. 9 o'clock brought the sound of Knox stumbling to the kitchen, presumably in search of more alcohol. The refrigerator door slammed with unnecessary force, followed by the crash of something glass hitting the floor and Knox's creative string of profanity. Jasper tensed at the violence in Knox's voice, even when directed at inanimate objects, knowing that such rage needed an outlet, and fearing that Knox might decide to climb the stairs in search of more satisfying targets. But Knox's footsteps returned to the living room, and the television volume increased again as he settled back into his chair. The horse racing had given way to late-night films, the kind of violent action movies that seemed to feed Knox's worst impulses. The sounds of explosions and gunfire filtered up through the floorboards, creating a soundtrack of aggression that made Luna stir restlessly in her sleep. 10 o'clock marked the beginning of Knox's truly dangerous period, drunk enough to be unpredictable, but not yet unconscious enough to be harmless. This was when his paranoia peaked, when shadows became enemies and innocent sounds became provocations. Jasper had learned to become absolutely still during these hours, to breathe quietly and avoid any movement that might draw attention from the volatile man below. Tonight, however, Knox's attention seemed focused on the telephone. Jasper could hear him making calls, his voice alternating between wheedling and threatening as he apparently tried to negotiate with creditors or arrange new lines of credit. The conversations were brief and seemed to end badly, based on the violent way Knox slammed the receiver down after each attempt. "Bloody thieves!" Knox's voice carried up the stairs, loud enough to wake Luna if she had been a lighter sleeper. "Think they can push me around. Think they can threaten me in my own home." The irony of Knox complaining about threats while terrorizing. His own family was not lost on Jasper, but he was more concerned with the escalating desperation in Knox's voice. Desperate men were dangerous men, and Knox's financial situation had clearly reached a crisis point that made him capable of anything. 11 o'clock brought a temporary lull as Knox's attention turned to what sounded like food preparation. The microwave beeping, drawers slamming as he searched for utensils. But the interlude was brief, and soon Knox was back in his chair, his commentary on the late-night programming becoming increasingly aggressive and nonsensical. By midnight, Knox's speech had deteriorated to the point where individual words were difficult to distinguish, but the tone remained consistently threatening. He seemed to be arguing with the television, responding to dialogue as if the characters could hear him, his voice rising to shouting levels that made Jasper wince with each outburst. Luna had been sleeping peacefully for hours, her breathing steady and undisturbed despite the chaos below. Jasper envied her ability to find peace in their hostile environment, but he also felt a fierce protectiveness at her vulnerability. She trusted him completely, had learned to associate his presence with safety and comfort, and that trust was both his greatest treasure and his heaviest burden. At midnight, Knox's voice took on a new quality, a slurred, rambling monologue that seemed to be directed at invisible listeners. He was talking about debts, about people who didn't understand the situation, about solutions that involved violence and revenge. The words were increasingly incoherent, but the underlying rage was unmistakable. "Show them who they're dealing with," Knox muttered, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet house. "Show them what happens when they push too far." The threat in his words made Jasper's blood run cold, not because he feared for himself, but because he understood that Knox's desperation was pushing him toward a breaking point that would destroy everyone in his path. Luna would not be spared simply because she was innocent. In Knox's current state, innocence might actually make her a more attractive target. 1 o'clock brought the sound Jasper had been waiting for, Knox's voice fading to mumbles, then silence, punctuated only by the occasional snore. But Jasper forced himself to wait longer, knowing that Knox sometimes experienced brief periods of wakefulness, even in his deepest alcoholic stupors. The man was unpredictable, even in unconsciousness, and Jasper could not afford to make his move too early. At 1:15, Jasper finally allowed himself to believe that Knox was truly unconscious. The snoring had become regular and deep, the kind of alcohol-induced sleep that typically lasted until late morning. More importantly, there had been no response to the various small sounds Jasper had deliberately made. The creak of the nursing chair, the soft rustle of moving fabric, the gentle sound of his breathing. Moving with the careful precision of a burglar in his own home, Jasper rose from the chair and began his preparations. He had been planning this moment for weeks, mentally, rehearsing every step while lying awake during previous nights of violence and fear. The execution would require perfect timing, absolute silence, and more courage than any 7-year-old should need to possess. His first stop was his own bedroom, where he retrieved the small canvas bag he had hidden beneath his mattress. Inside were the supplies he had been gradually accumulating. Loose change stolen penny by penny from Vivian's purse, a small box of crackers hoarded from school lunches, a miniature torch he had found in a kitchen drawer. The total amount of money was pitiful, perhaps £3 in various coins, but it might be enough for a bus fare if walking proved impossible. Luna's bag was hidden in her closet, behind boxes of outgrown clothes that Vivian had saved for reasons she could no longer remember. This bag contained the essentials for infant care: bottles, formula powder, nappies, and a change of clothes in the next size up that Luna would soon need. Jasper had assembled these supplies with the methodical care of someone preparing for a siege, knowing that Luna's needs were more urgent and complex than his own. The most critical element was warmth. February nights in Birmingham were brutally cold, and Luna's infant body would lose heat rapidly in the outdoor air. Jasper selected her warmest sleep suit, a thick fleece outfit with attached mittens and booties that would provide maximum coverage. Over this went her winter coat, a puffy pink jacket that made her look like a tiny astronaut, but would shield her from the wind. For himself, Jasper chose layers: a thermal shirt beneath his heaviest jumper, his winter coat, and the wool hat that Vivian had knitted before her decline into medication dependency. He would be carrying Luna for the entire journey, and his own comfort was secondary to ensuring her safety and warmth. The most dangerous part of the preparation was gathering Luna from her crib without waking her. She was normally a sound sleeper, but the stress of recent weeks had made her more sensitive to disturbances. Jasper approached her crib with the stealth of a master thief, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Luna stirred slightly as he lifted her her small body instinctively curling against his chest as he transferred her to his shoulder. She made a soft sound of protest but did not wake, her trust in his handling absolute even in sleep. Jasper held his breath until her breathing returned to its steady rhythm, then began the delicate process of dressing her for their journey. Getting Luna into her fleece sleepsuit while she slept required patience and flexibility that Jasper had developed through months of caring for her. He worked one arm at a time into the sleeves, supporting her head while maneuvering the fabric over her torso, fastening the snaps with movements so gentle they barely disturbed her position. The winter coat was more challenging, but Luna remained blissfully unconscious throughout the process. With Luna properly dressed and secured against his chest, Jasper made one final circuit of the nursery, gathering the last essential items. Her favorite comfort blanket, a soft yellow rectangle that had been with her since birth, went into the bag along with her preferred pacifier and a small stuffed elephant that helped her sleep. These items might seem trivial compared to food and shelter, but Jasper understood that Luna's emotional needs were as important as her physical ones. The journey to the ground floor required navigating a minefield of potential noise hazards, creaking floorboards, squeaky hinges, and the general tendency of old houses to announce movement with various groans and sighs. Jasper had mapped every sound-producing surface during his months of midnight wanderings, creating mental charts of safe pathways that would allow silent passage through the house. Each step was deliberate and measured, his weight distributed, carefully to minimize sound. Luna remained asleep against his shoulder, her breathing warm against his neck, her complete trust in his care both inspiring and terrifying. If he failed tonight, if they were caught before reaching safety, Knox's revenge would be swift and final. The living room presented the greatest challenge, as Knox was sprawled in his chair directly beside the path to the front door. His snoring was deep and regular, but Jasper knew that even unconscious, Knox retained some level of awareness that could be triggered by unexpected sounds or movements. The television was still playing, its blue light flickering across Knox's slack features and creating moving shadows that made the room feel alive with threat. Jasper pressed himself against the wall, moving inch by inch around the perimeter of the room, while keeping Knox in his peripheral vision. The man looked smaller in sleep, less intimidating without his conscious cruelty animating his features, but Jasper felt no sympathy for his tormentor. Knox had made his choices, had created this situation through his own violence and selfishness, and whatever consequences followed would be entirely of his own making. The front door was ancient and temperamental, prone to sticking and squeaking at the worst possible moments. Jasper had practiced opening it silently during previous sleepless nights, learning the precise combination of movements that would allow it to swing open without protest. Tonight, his preparation paid off as the door opened smoothly and quietly, revealing the cold February night beyond. The temperature difference was immediate and shocking. The house had been warm with central heating, while the outdoor air carried the sharp bite of winter that immediately penetrated their clothing. Luna stirred at the sudden cold, but did not wake, her face automatically nuzzling deeper into the warmth of Jasper's neck as her body sought protection from the elements. Jasper pulled the door closed behind them with infinite care, ensuring that the latch engaged without the clicking sound that might wake Knox. Only when he was certain the door was secure did he allow himself to breathe normally, his exhaled breath creating small clouds in the frigid air as he stood on the front step of what had been their prison. The street was empty and silent, illuminated by sporadic streetlights that created pools of orange light separated by deep shadows. Most of the houses showed no signs of life, windows dark, curtains drawn, families sleeping peacefully in beds where children did not fear the adults who were supposed to protect them. Jasper felt a momentary stab of envy for those normal families, but quickly pushed the emotion aside in favor of focusing on the task ahead. Luna's weight was already noticeable, and they had not yet left their front garden. 10 months of growth had made her a substantial burden for someone of Jasper's size, and he knew that carrying her 6 blocks through winter streets would test the limits of his endurance. But the alternative, leaving her with Knox, was unthinkable, and Jasper had learned that desperation could provide strength that logic said should not exist. The first block passed without incident, Jasper's steps careful and measured as he adjusted to Luna's weight and the challenge of maintaining balance on pavement that showed patches of ice from the day's brief snow flurries. His breath came in visible puffs, and he could feel the cold beginning to penetrate his layers of clothing, but Luna remained warm and sleeping against his chest. By the second block, Jasper's arms were beginning to ache from Luna's weight, and he was forced to stop for his first rest. He found a low wall outside a corner shop, settling carefully with Luna still in his arms, her face protected from the cold air by the collar of his coat. The brief respite allowed him to readjust his grip and redistribute her weight, but it also gave him time to fully appreciate the magnitude of what he was attempting. 6 blocks had seemed manageable when measured during daylight walks with no burden to carry, but now the distance felt enormous. Luna was growing heavier with each step. His own injuries from Knox's previous beatings were making movement painful, and the cold was affecting his coordination and strength. Doubt crept into his mind like poison, whispering that he was too small, too weak, too young to save them both. But then Luna made a soft sound in her sleep, her small hand curling into his jumper with unconscious trust, and Jasper's resolve crystallized into something unbreakable. She was depending on him completely, had no one else in the world who would protect her, and he would carry her to safety even if it killed him. The alternative, returning to Knox's house and waiting for the inevitable escalation of violence, was simply not acceptable. The third block brought new challenges as Jasper's legs began to tremble from exertion and his breathing became labored. Luna's weight seemed to increase with each step, and he was forced to stop twice more for brief rests that barely restored his strength before it was depleted again. The hospital was still 3 blocks away, but already felt impossibly distant. Car passed during his third rest stop, its headlights briefly illuminating their position on a bench outside a closed chemist shop. Jasper instinctively pressed deeper into the shadows, terrified that someone might stop to ask questions about a child carrying a baby through the streets in the middle of the night. But the car continued without slowing, its driver presumably seeing nothing unusual in the darkened doorway. The fourth block nearly broke his resolve as Luna began to stir, her sleep disturbed by the cold and the unfamiliar sensation of prolonged movement. She made soft sounds of distress that Jasper feared might escalate to crying, and he found himself talking to her in the soft, reassuring voice that had become his most effective tool for maintaining her calm. "Almost there, Luna Bug," he whispered. Against her ear, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Just a little bit further, and then we'll be somewhere warm and safe. Jazz has got you, sweetheart. Everything's going to be all right." Luna settled at the sound of his voice, her trust in him absolute even in her semi-conscious state. Her small body relaxed against his chest, and Jasper felt a surge of protective love so fierce it nearly brought tears to his eyes. She was his responsibility, his greatest treasure, and the most important thing he would ever do in his life was getting her to safety. The fifth block was a test of pure willpower as Jasper's body began to rebel against the prolonged exertion. His arms felt like they were on fire, his legs shook with each step, and his breathing came in short gasps that created larger clouds in the frigid air. But Birmingham Children's Hospital was finally visible in the distance, its modern facade and brightly lit emergency entrance calling to them like a beacon of hope. Luna was stirring more frequently now, her internal clock telling her that something was wrong with their routine. She made small sounds of confusion and discomfort that Jasper soothed with constant murmurs of reassurance, but he could feel her approaching wakefulness and knew that time was running out before she would begin crying in earnest. The sixth and final block stretched before them like an eternity, but Jasper forced his legs to continue moving, his mind focused entirely on the promise of safety that lay ahead. Each step brought them closer to help, closer to adults who were trained to protect children, closer to a world where Luna could grow up without fear. "Look, Luna Bug," Jasper whispered as they approached the hospital's automatic doors, his voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. "We made it. We're going to be safe now." The doors slid open as they approached, and suddenly they were inside, surrounded by warmth and light and the antiseptic smell of a place where healing happened. Jasper's legs nearly gave out as relief flooded through him, but he managed to remain standing, Luna still secure in his arms, both of them finally somewhere that represented hope instead of horror. The emergency department was quiet at this hour, with only a few staff members visible behind the reception desk. But as Jasper stood there, a small boy carrying his baby sister and swaying from exhaustion, he caught the attention of a nurse whose trained eye immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. She was walking toward them now, her face showing the kind of professional concern that Jasper had dreamed about during the longest nights of their ordeal. Help was finally coming, and Luna would never have to fear Knox Ashford again. The longest night of their lives was about to end, and their new beginning was about to start. The automatic doors of Birmingham Children's Hospital closed behind Jasper, with a soft whoosh sealing out the February cold and enveloping them in an atmosphere of warmth and antiseptic cleanliness that felt like stepping into another world. The emergency department was bathed in the kind of bright, clinical lighting that made everything appear sharp and real, a stark contrast to the shadowy nightmare they had just escaped. Jasper stood in the entrance, swaying slightly from exhaustion, Luna still sleeping against his chest despite the dramatic change in environment. The waiting area was nearly empty at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, with only a handful of people scattered across the rows of blue plastic chairs. An elderly man holding a blood-stained cloth to his hand, a young woman rocking a feverish toddler, a teenager with what appeared to be a sports injury. Their eyes turned toward Jasper with the idle curiosity of people passing time in uncomfortable circumstances. But their attention quickly returned to their own problems when nothing obviously dramatic presented itself. Jasper's legs felt like they might give out at any moment, the adrenaline that had sustained him through their journey beginning to ebb and leave behind a bone-deep weariness that threatened to overwhelm him. Luna's weight, which he had carried for 6 blocks through winter streets, now felt impossible to support for even another minute. But he forced himself to remain standing, knowing that appearing in control was crucial to ensuring they received the help they needed. The reception desk was staffed by a single clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who was processing paperwork with the methodical efficiency of someone accustomed to working night shifts. She looked up as Jasper approached, her professional smile faltering slightly as she took in the sight of a small boy carrying an infant in the middle of the night. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. "Are you here with someone? Where are your parents?" The questions were standard, logical, and completely impossible for Jasper to answer honestly without revealing the entirety of their situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but found that his voice had abandoned him somewhere during their desperate journey. The words that had seemed so clear in his mind, the explanation he had rehearsed during sleepless nights, suddenly felt inadequate to convey the complexity of what had brought them here. "I need help," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need help. Luna. My sister. She's not hurt, but we can't go home." The clerk's expression shifted from routine concern to sharp attention as her training kicked in. She had worked in pediatric emergency medicine long enough to recognize the signs of a serious situation, even when they presented in unexpected forms. A 7-year-old boy carrying an infant through hospital doors in the early hours of the morning was not a scenario that occurred without significant underlying trauma. "Of course, love," she said, reaching for her telephone. "Let me get one of our nurses to come and talk with you. Can you tell me your name?" "Jasper," he replied, his voice growing stronger as he sensed the genuine desire to help in her tone. "Jasper Whitmore. And this is Luna. She's my sister." All right, Jasper. I'm going to call Nurse Blackwood to come and see you. She's very nice, and she's excellent with children. Can you sit down for me? You look exhausted. But Jasper remained standing, his protective instincts unwilling to let him relax even in this safe environment. Luna was stirring more frequently. Now, her internal schedule disrupted by their unusual journey, and he could sense her approaching wakefulness. When she woke, she would be confused and possibly frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings, and he needed to be alert enough to comfort her. Within moments, a nurse appeared from the treatment area, moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to responding to urgent situations. Cordelia Blackwood was in her early 40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that held the particular combination of warmth and authority that came from 15 years of pediatric nursing. She had seen enough in her career to recognize crisis when it walked through their doors, and everything about this situation triggered her professional instincts. "Hello, Jasper," she said, her voice pitched at exactly the right level, calm, enough to be reassuring, warm enough to encourage trust, but serious enough to convey that she understood this was not a routine visit. "I'm Nurse Blackwood, but you can call me Cordelia. I hear you and Luna need some help tonight." Jasper looked up at her, his dark eyes holding far too much knowledge for someone his age, and Cordelia felt her heart clench with recognition. She had seen that expression before, the premature wisdom that came from experiencing adult horrors while still possessing a child's vulnerability. Whatever had brought this boy and his baby sister to their emergency department in the middle of the night, it was serious enough to warrant her complete attention. "Yes," Jasper replied simply, but Cordelia noticed how he instinctively adjusted his position to keep Luna's body shielded from view, how his eyes constantly scanned the area around them, how his entire posture suggested someone prepared to defend against attack. These were not the behaviors of a child who had experienced a simple family emergency. "Let's go somewhere more comfortable where we can talk," Cordelia suggested, gesturing toward a private consultation room that was specifically designed for sensitive conversations. "It's warmer there, and Luna will be more comfortable when she wakes up." Jasper hesitated, his survival instincts warring with his desperate need for help. The past 8 months had taught him to be wary of adults who offered assistance, but something in Cordelia's manner, the way she spoke to him as an equal rather than a small child, the genuine concern in her eyes, the fact that she had immediately recognized Luna's needs, made him want to trust her. "Will you call the police?" he asked, the question revealing both his fear and his understanding that their situation was serious enough to involve law enforcement. Cordelia's training had prepared her for this moment, the point where a child in crisis revealed their awareness that authority figures would need to be involved. Her response would determine whether Jasper continued to trust her with the truth or retreated into the protective silence that many abused children used as their final defense. "Jasper," she said, crouching down to bring herself to his eye level, without crowding him. "My job is to make sure you and Luna are safe and healthy. If someone has hurt you, then yes, we might need to involve other people who can help protect you. But right now, my only concern is taking care of both of you. Can you trust me to do that?" The honesty in her response, the acknowledgement that help might involve consequences that could feel frightening, actually increased Jasper's confidence in her reliability. Adults who made promises they might not be able to keep had proven dangerous, in his experience, but Cordelia was being truthful about the complexity of their situation. "Okay," he said quietly, following her toward the consultation room with steps that were careful but no longer fearful. The room was designed to be as non-threatening as possible. Warm lighting instead of harsh fluorescence, comfortable chairs, arranged in a circle rather than clinical examination tables, colorful artwork on the walls that depicted cheerful scenes of children playing. But what mattered most to Jasper was that it had a door that could be closed, providing privacy for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Cordelia helped him settle into one of the chairs, noting how he continued to hold Luna despite the obvious strain on his small frame. The baby was beginning to stir more actively now, her sleep disturbed by the unfamiliar voices and environment. But she seemed content to remain in Jasper's arms, rather than reaching for the adult stranger. "She trusts you completely," Cordelia observed, recognizing the significance of Luna's behavior. Babies who had been well cared for showed this kind of secure attachment, but babies who had experienced trauma often exhibited different patterns of bonding. Luna's calm acceptance of Jasper's care suggested that despite whatever had brought them here, she had been receiving consistent, loving attention from her brother. "I take care of her," Jasper replied matter-of-factly, as if this arrangement was entirely normal. "I feed her and change her and make sure she's safe. She knows I won't let anything bad happen to her." The simple statement carried enormous weight, revealing layers of responsibility and maturity that no 7-year-old should have been forced to develop. Cordelia made mental notes about the family dynamics that would have created this situation, but kept her expression neutral and supportive. "You're obviously very good at taking care of her," Cordelia said, allowing genuine admiration to color her voice. "She's lucky to have such a caring big brother. But Jasper, taking care of a baby is a big job for someone your age. You shouldn't have to do it all by yourself." Luna chose that moment to fully wake up, her eyes opening to take in the unfamiliar surroundings with the alert curiosity of a healthy 10-month-old. She looked around the room with interest rather than fear, but her gaze consistently returned to Jasper's face, seeking reassurance that everything was all right. When he smiled at her and spoke in the soft, gentle voice that had become their private language, she relaxed completely. "Hello, Lunabug," Jasper murmured, his voice taking on the tender quality that Cordelia recognized as genuine parental love. "We're somewhere safe now. This is Cordelia, and she's going to help us." Luna's response was a babbled sound that might have been an attempt at communication, accompanied by the kind of smile that lit up her entire face. She was clearly a thriving, well-loved child, despite whatever circumstances had brought them to the hospital. And Cordelia felt her respect for Jasper increase as she witnessed the quality of care he had been providing. "She's beautiful," Cordelia said sincerely, noting Luna's bright eyes, healthy complexion, and the obvious signs of good nutrition and hygiene that indicated consistent caregiving. "How old is she?" 10 months, Jasper replied, his voice holding the pride of someone who had watched every milestone of her development. "She'll be 1 in April. She can pull herself up to standing and she says baba when she wants her bottle. She likes music and bright colors, and she always smiles when she sees me in the morning." The detailed knowledge of Luna's development and preferences confirmed Cordelia's assessment that Jasper had indeed been functioning as her primary caregiver. This level of intimate familiarity with an infant's needs and personality came only from constant attentive care over extended periods. Whatever their home situation, Jasper had been doing the work of a parent while still being a child himself. "Jasper," Cordelia said gently, recognizing that the moment had come for the crucial questions. "Can you tell me what happened tonight? What brought you and Luna to the hospital?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of truth that was about to be revealed. Jasper looked down at Luna, who had begun to fuss slightly as hunger and confusion about their changed routine started to affect her mood. He bounced her gently in the way that always soothed her, his mind clearly working through how to explain the inexplicable. "Knox hits me when Mummy's sleeping," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet, as if saying the words too loudly might somehow make Knox appear in their safe room. "He was going to hit Luna tonight. I couldn't let him hurt her anymore. She's just a baby." The simple, devastating statement contained multitudes. Months of abuse endured in silence, a child's desperate decision to protect his infant sister, a journey through winter streets that could have killed them both. Cordelia felt her professional composure waver for a moment as the full implications of Jasper's words settled over her like a physical weight. "Knox is your stepfather?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in her chest at the thought of someone harming these children. "He married Mummy when Luna was 2 months old," Jasper explained, his matter-of-fact tone making the abuse sound almost routine. At first he was nice, but then he started getting angry about things. He drinks a lot and he gambles, and when he loses money he gets really mad. Mummy takes medicine that makes her sleep, so she doesn't know what happens. Each detail added another layer to the picture of systematic abuse and neglect that Cordelia was assembling in her mind. An alcoholic, gambling stepfather with impulse, control problems, a mother rendered absent by substance abuse, a 7-year-old boy forced to become a parent to his infant sister while absorbing violence meant to control and intimidate. "How long has Knox been hitting you?" she asked, already knowing that the answer would be measured in months rather than days. "Since before Christmas," Jasper replied, unconsciously touching his ribs where the most recent bruises were hidden beneath his layers of clothing. "It got worse after New Year's. He said I was making too much noise, that I was costing him money, that Mummy would be better off without me around to cause problems. The psychological manipulation was as devastating as the physical abuse, Cordelia realized. Knox had been systematically destroying Jasper's sense of self-worth while using Luna as leverage to ensure his silence. The boy had been carrying not just the responsibility for Luna's care, but also the weight of believing that he was somehow responsible for the violence inflicted upon him. "Jasper, listen to me very carefully," Cordelia said, leaning forward, to ensure eye contact while keeping her voice gentle but firm. "None of this is your fault. Knox hitting you is wrong, and it's against the law. You didn't deserve it, and you couldn't have prevented it by being different or better or quieter. Adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them." Luna had begun to cry softly, her hunger and confusion finally overcoming her usual calm temperament. Jasper immediately shifted into caregiver mode, reaching into the bag he had brought to retrieve a bottle and the container of formula powder. His movements were practiced and efficient, but Cordelia noticed how he winced when reaching above his head, suggesting injuries to his torso that were hidden by his clothing. "Let me help you with that," Cordelia offered, recognizing that Jasper's injuries were likely making even simple movements painful. "I can warm the bottle while you hold Luna." "I can do it," Jasper replied automatically, the response of someone who had learned that accepting help often came with strings attached. But then he seemed to reconsider, looking at Cordelia's face and seeing only genuine desire to assist. "But if you want to help, that would be nice. She likes her bottles. Warm but not too hot." The small concession felt like a victory to Cordelia, a sign that Jasper was beginning to trust that help could be offered without hidden agendas or dangerous consequences. She took the bottle and formula powder, noting the quality of the supplies. Good brand formula, clean bottles, everything a responsible caregiver would choose for an infant's nutrition. "You've been taking very good care of her," Cordelia observed as she prepared Luna's bottle, using the water warmer that was standard equipment in all their consultation rooms. "She's clearly healthy and well-nourished. That's not easy to accomplish when you're only 7 years old yourself." "She needs me," Jasper replied simply, as if this explanation covered everything. "Nobody else makes sure she gets what she needs. Knox doesn't like it when she cries, and Mummy isn't really there anymore, so I have to take care of her." The bottle was ready, and Cordelia handed it back to Jasper, watching as Luna immediately latched on and began drinking with the enthusiasm of a hungry baby who trusted completely in her caregiver's ability to meet her needs. The sight was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, a testament to the love between siblings and an indictment of the adults who had failed them both. "Jasper," Cordelia said quietly, knowing that her next actions would irrevocably change their lives. "I need to call some people who can help make sure you and Luna are safe. That means doctors will need to check that you're both healthy, and police officers will need to ask questions about what Knox has been doing. It might feel scary, but these are all people whose job is to protect children." Jasper's grip on Luna tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady when he responded. "Will they take Luna away from me?" The question revealed his deepest fear. Not that he would be separated from his abusive home, but that he would be separated from the sister who had become his entire world. Cordelia understood that Jasper's identity was completely wrapped up in his role as Luna's protector, and that any plan for their safety would need to account for their bond. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you stay together," Cordelia promised, meaning every word. "You've shown that you can take excellent care of Luna, and separating siblings is something we try very hard to avoid. But right now, I need to focus on making sure you're both safe and healthy. Can you trust me to do that?" Jasper studied her face for a long moment, his young mind making calculations about trust and risk that no child should have needed to master. But something in Cordelia's expression, perhaps the genuine respect she showed for his relationship with Luna, or the way she spoke to him as someone whose opinions mattered, convinced him to take the leap of faith that would change everything. "Okay," he said quietly, "but I need to stay with Luna. She gets scared when I'm not there, and she doesn't know you yet." "Of course," Cordelia agreed, already reaching for the phone that would begin the process of protecting them both. "Luna can stay with you while we get everything sorted out. You're her big brother, and that's not going to change." As Cordelia began making the calls that would bring doctors, police officers, and social workers into their lives, Jasper continued feeding Luna, his voice soft and reassuring as he talked her through this strange new environment. "It's going to be different now. Luna bug," he whispered against her soft hair. "But different might be better. Different might mean safe." Luna's response was a contented sigh as she finished her bottle, her small body relaxing against Jasper's chest in complete trust. Whatever came next, whatever questions would be asked and decisions would be made, she was safe in the arms of the brother who had carried her 6 blocks through a winter night to give her a chance at the childhood she deserved. The truth was, finally in the light, and there would be no going back to the darkness they had left behind. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of gentle but persistent questioning, medical examinations, and the careful documentation that would transform Jasper, and Luna's private nightmare into official evidence of systematic abuse. Cordelia had made her calls with the efficiency of someone who understood that every minute delayed was another minute that Knox Ashford remained free to destroy evidence or threaten witnesses, and the response had been swift and comprehensive. Detective Inspector Thorne Fitzgerald arrived first, his 20-year career in family crimes having taught him that cases involving very young victims required a delicate balance of urgency and patience. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely silver hair and the kind of calm presence that seemed to naturally reassure frightened children. His first priority was ensuring that Jasper felt safe enough to provide the detailed testimony that would be necessary to build a solid case against Knox. "Hello, Jasper," Thorne said, settling into one of the consultation room chairs with deliberate casualness. "I'm Detective Inspector Fitzgerald, but you can call me Thorne if that's easier. Nurse Blackwood tells me you've been very brave tonight, taking such good care of your sister." Jasper looked up from where he was gently bouncing Luna, who had become increasingly fussy as the strange environment and disrupted routine began to affect her usual calm demeanor. The detective's tone was respectful rather than condescending, treating him as someone whose account mattered rather than a small child whose words might be unreliable. "Is Knox in trouble?" Jasper asked, his voice holding a mixture of hope and fear that Thorne recognized from dozens of similar cases. Children who had been abused often experienced conflicted feelings about their abusers facing consequences, especially when those abusers were family members who controlled their daily survival. "Knox will have to answer some serious questions about how he's been treating you and Luna," Thorne replied honestly. "But right now my job is to make sure you're both safe and to understand exactly what's been happening in your house. Can you help me with that?" The interview that followed was conducted with the careful attention to detail that serious criminal cases required, but adapted to account for Jasper's age and the traumatic nature of his experiences. Thorne had worked with child victims long enough to know that rushing the process or pushing too hard for details could actually damage both the child's well-being and the strength of the eventual prosecution. Jasper's account was remarkably clear and chronologically organized for someone his age, suggesting both exceptional intelligence and the unfortunate reality that he had been forced to develop adult-level observational skills for survival purposes. He described Knox's escalating pattern of violence with the detached precision of someone who had learned to dissociate from physical pain, but his voice grew stronger and more emotional when discussing threats to Luna's safety. "He said if I told anyone, he would make sure Luna got hurt too," Jasper explained, unconsciously tightening his protective hold on his sister. "He said nobody would believe me anyway, because I'm just a kid and he's an adult. He said Mummy would choose him over us if she had to pick." Each revelation added another layer to the case Thorne was building in his mind: psychological manipulation, threats against an infant, isolation tactics designed to prevent disclosure. Knox Ashford was not simply a man with anger management problems. He was a calculated predator who had deliberately targeted a vulnerable family and systematically destroyed their ability to seek help. While Jasper was providing his statement, Dr. Hugh Pemberton was conducting the medical examination that would document the physical evidence of abuse. Hugh was the hospital's senior pediatrician, a gentleman in his 50s whose expertise in child trauma cases had made him the preferred choice for situations involving suspected abuse. His examination of Jasper was thorough, but conducted with infinite sensitivity to the boy's obvious discomfort with being touched by adult hands. The results were damning in their comprehensiveness. Jasper's small body told the story of months of systematic violence, bruises in various stages of healing across his torso and back, finger-shaped marks on his upper arms consistent with being grabbed forcefully, and older injuries that had healed improperly due to lack of medical attention. The pattern was unmistakably intentional, targeted to areas that would normally be hidden by clothing. "You've been very strong, Jasper," Dr. Pemberton said as he helped the boy back into his shirt, noting how Jasper automatically positioned himself to shield the extent of his injuries from view. "These injuries must have been very painful. But you've done an excellent job of taking care of yourself and Luna, despite everything you've been through." Luna's examination revealed a completely different story. A healthy, well-nourished baby showing all the signs of excellent care and secure attachment. Her development was age-appropriate in every category. Her nutrition and hygiene were exemplary, and her responses to Jasper confirmed the strength of their sibling bond. The contrast between their physical conditions told its own story about Jasper's priorities and the extent of his self-sacrifice. While the medical and police investigations proceeded, social worker Isla Montenegro was conducting her own assessment of the family situation. Isla was a veteran of the Birmingham Social Services system, with 15 years of experience in child protection cases that had taught her to recognize both genuine emergencies and the complex family dynamics that often surrounded them. Her first priority was visiting the Whitmore Ashford home, where she found exactly what Jasper's testimony had suggested: evidence of neglect, alcohol abuse, and the kind of household chaos that created perfect conditions for child abuse to flourish unchecked. Knox was still unconscious when police arrived, passed out in his living room chair surrounded by empty bottles and gambling paraphernalia, completely unaware that his victims had escaped. The arrest was anticlimactic compared to the dramatic violence Knox had inflicted on his family. He woke confused and disoriented, initially believing that the police presence was related to his gambling debts rather than his abuse of the children. It was only when the charges were read, multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, and criminal threats, that Knox began to understand the magnitude of his legal situation. Vivian's awakening to the reality of her children's absence was more complex and devastating. The combination of prescription medications that had kept her in a twilight state for months meant that she had been genuinely unaware of Knox's violence, but her ignorance felt like willful blindness to the social workers who interviewed her. How could a mother not notice that her 7-year-old son was covered in bruises and functioning as the primary caregiver for her infant daughter? "Where are my babies?" were Vivian's first coherent words when police explained the situation, her voice thick with medication and confusion. "Where are Jasper and Luna? Are they hurt?" The conversation that followed was painful for everyone involved. Vivian's shock at learning about Knox's abuse seemed genuine, but her immediate focus on getting her children back, rather than understanding why they had needed to flee, suggested a concerning lack of insight into her own role in creating the dangerous situation. Back at the hospital, Jasper was meeting the people who would determine his and Luna's immediate future. The Hartwell family had been contacted within hours of Cordelia's initial calls, their status as experienced emergency foster carers making them the preferred placement for siblings who needed immediate protection. Hazel and Benedict Hartwell had been providing foster care for over a decade, specializing in cases involving very young children and emergency placements. Hazel was a former primary school teacher whose own inability to have biological children had led her into fostering, as a way to channel her maternal instincts toward children who desperately needed stability. Benedict was a carpenter who had modified their Birmingham home specifically to accommodate foster children, creating spaces that felt welcoming rather than institutional. Their approach was based on the understanding that children who had experienced trauma needed predictability, warmth, and adults who could remain calm in the face of challenging behaviors. "Hello, Jasper," Hazel said when she arrived at the hospital, her voice carrying the particular quality of warmth that came from genuine affection for children rather than professional obligation. "I'm Hazel Hartwell, and this is my husband Benedict. We heard that you and Luna might need somewhere safe to stay for a while." Jasper's response was cautious, but not fearful. His experience with Cordelia and the other hospital staff had begun to rebuild his capacity to trust adults who demonstrated consistent kindness. But his primary concern remained Luna's welfare, and he made it clear that any arrangement would need to accommodate his role as her primary caregiver. "I take care of Luna," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been making life and death decisions for months. "She needs me to feed her and put her to sleep and make sure she's not scared. I can't go somewhere where I can't take care of her." "Of course," Hazel replied without hesitation, recognizing that Jasper's relationship with Luna was both the source of his strength and his most vulnerable point. "We have a lovely room that would be perfect for both of you, with a proper cot for Luna and a bed for you right beside it. You'll be able to take care of her just like you always have." The conversation continued for nearly an hour as Jasper interviewed the Hartwells with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this decision would affect Luna's safety as much as his own. His questions were sophisticated and revealed his understanding of the responsibilities involved in caring for an infant. Did they know about Luna's feeding schedule, her sleep preferences, the specific way she liked to be held when she was fussy? Benedict was particularly impressed by Jasper's detailed knowledge of Luna's developmental needs and his obvious competence in meeting them. "You've done an incredible job taking care of your sister," he told Jasper sincerely. "She's lucky to have such a devoted big brother. We'd be honored to help you continue taking care of her in our home." The legal proceedings that would determine Knox's fate were already beginning to take shape. Crown Prosecutor Sarah Chen had been assigned to the case, her experience with domestic violence and child abuse cases making her the logical choice for what promised to be a complex prosecution. The evidence was strong. Jasper's detailed testimony, comprehensive medical documentation, and Knox's own behavior during his arrest had created a solid foundation for multiple felony charges. But Sarah also understood that successful prosecution would depend heavily on Jasper's ability to testify in court, a prospect that filled everyone involved with both hope and concern. 7-year-old witnesses presented unique challenges. Their testimony could be extraordinarily powerful when delivered clearly, but the trauma of facing their abuser in a courtroom setting could also cause significant psychological damage. "We'll take every possible measure to make the process as gentle as we can," Sarah explained to Isla during their planning meeting. Closed-circuit testimony, victim advocates, child psychologists. Whatever Jasper needs to feel safe enough to tell his story. But ultimately, his testimony will be crucial to ensuring Knox receives a sentence that reflects the severity of his crimes. Meanwhile, Knox's own legal situation was deteriorating rapidly, as the full extent of his financial problems became clear. His gambling debts were far more extensive than anyone had realized, and several of his creditors were connected to organized crime figures who did not accept delayed payments gracefully. The stress of potential prosecution was compounded by the very real danger posed by people who had violent solutions to debt collection problems. Knox's attempts to contact Vivian from jail were monitored and recorded, revealing the manipulative tactics he had used to maintain control over the family. His calls alternated between promises of reform and thinly veiled threats, attempting to convince Vivian that the children's disclosure was somehow a betrayal of family loyalty, rather than a desperate bid for survival. "You need to get them back," Knox insisted during one recorded conversation, his voice carrying the edge of desperation that had made him so dangerous. "Tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that Jasper exaggerated everything. Kids make up stories all the time, everyone knows that." But Vivian's responses were becoming less supportive as the reality of her situation began to penetrate her. Medication-induced haze. The forced reduction in her prescription drug intake, implemented as part of her fitness assessment as a parent, was allowing her to think more clearly than she had in months. What she was beginning to see was devastating in its clarity. Her children had been living in terror while she slept through their suffering. Jasper had been forced to become Luna's parent, while absorbing regular beatings designed to keep him silent. Luna's entire infancy had been spent in an atmosphere of violence and fear that could have destroyed her capacity for normal development. The mother who was supposed to protect them had instead become an obstacle to their safety. By the time morning came, the wheels of justice were turning with the inexorable momentum that characterized serious criminal cases. Knox was facing multiple felony charges that could result in a substantial prison sentence. Vivian was beginning the long process of confronting her own failures as a parent and her role in enabling Knox's abuse. Most importantly, Jasper and Luna were safely in the care of people who understood their needs and were committed to their well-being. The transition to the Hartwell home was managed with careful attention to minimizing additional trauma for both children. Jasper was allowed to maintain his routines with Luna, feeding her lunch and putting her down for her afternoon nap in the bright, cheerful nursery that Hazel and Benedict had prepared. The room was designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional, with soft colors, natural light, and furniture scaled appropriately for both an infant and the 7-year-old who cared for her. "This is beautiful," Jasper said quietly as he settled Luna into her new cot, his voice holding wonder at the thought that such spaces could exist for children like them. "She'll like the mobile. She loves things that move and make soft sounds." Luna's easy acceptance of her new environment was testament to both her resilient temperament and the security provided by Jasper's constant presence. As long as her brother was nearby, talking to her in the gentle voice that had become her primary source of comfort, she seemed content to explore this new space with the curiosity of a healthy 10-month-old. The first session with child psychologist, Dr. Octavia Sterling, was scheduled for the following week, designed to begin the process of helping Jasper understand that his survival strategies, while admirable, were no longer necessary. Octavia specialized in working with children who had experienced complex trauma, and she understood that Jasper's identity was completely wrapped up in his role as Luna's protector. "Our goal isn't to take away his sense of responsibility for Luna," Octavia explained to Hazel and Benedict during their preliminary meeting. "That relationship is clearly the source of his strength and resilience. Instead, we need to help him understand that he can still be a loving big brother without carrying the weight of being her parent. He needs permission to be 7 years old again." As the first day in their new reality drew to a close, Jasper sat beside Luna's cot in the Hartwell home, watching her sleep peacefully in safety for the first time in her short life. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of her breathing and the distant murmur of Hazel and Benedict talking in the kitchen below. Outside the window, Birmingham's lights twinkled in the darkness. But inside this room, 2 children who had survived the unthinkable were finally, truly safe. "We did it, Luna Bug," Jasper whispered, his voice holding exhaustion and relief in equal measure. We're somewhere safe now. Somewhere people will take care of us both. You're going to be... Okay, we're both going to be okay. Luna's peaceful sleep was her only response, but it was answer enough. The wheels of justice would continue to turn. Legal proceedings would unfold, and healing would begin. But tonight, for the first time in months, Jasper could close his eyes, without fear, knowing that when morning came, Luna would still be safe beside him. The nightmare was finally over, and their new beginning was just starting to unfold. 3 months had passed since that February night when Jasper carried Luna through the automatic doors of Birmingham Children's Hospital, and the transformation in both children was remarkable, enough to bring tears to the eyes of everyone who had witnessed their journey from survival to healing. The legal proceedings that would determine Knox Ashford's fate were approaching their climax, but more importantly, Jasper and Luna were learning what it meant to live without fear. The Hartwell home had become their sanctuary in every sense of the word, a place where adults anticipated children's needs rather than viewing them as inconveniences, where meal times were predictable and pleasant rather than minefields of potential violence, where bedtime meant safety and comfort rather than vigilant listening for approaching footsteps. Hazel and Benedict had approached their care with the understanding that healing from trauma required patience, consistency, and respect for the children's existing bond. Jasper's adjustment to his new reality had been complex and sometimes painful to witness. 8 months of hypervigilance and survival mode could not be erased overnight, and there were still moments when unexpected sounds would cause him to instinctively position himself between Luna and perceived threats. But gradually, with the help of Dr. Octavia Sterling's gentle therapy sessions and the Hartwell's unwavering patience, he was beginning to learn that protection could be shared rather than shouldered alone. "You're still Luna's big brother," Dr. Sterling had explained during one of their weekly sessions, her office decorated with toys and art supplies that helped children express feelings they might not have words for. "That will never change, and nobody wants to take that away from you. But now you have adults who can help carry some of the worry, so you can have room in your heart for other things too." The breakthrough had come 6 weeks into their placement when Luna had fallen and bumped her head while playing in the garden. Jasper's immediate panic, the terror that he had somehow failed in his protective duties, had been met not with criticism, but with Hazel's gentle reminder that accidents were part of childhood, that Luna was safe, and that comfort could come from multiple sources. Watching Hazel efficiently tend to Luna's minor injury while Benedict provided reassurance to both children had been Jasper's first glimpse of what functional family dynamics could look like. Luna's development during their months with the Hartwells had been extraordinary to witness. Free from the constant tension that had characterized her early months, she was blossoming into a confident, curious toddler who approached the world with the fearless enthusiasm that was her birthright. She had taken her first independent steps in the Hartwells' living room, with Jasper cheering enthusiastically and all 3 adults reaching for their cameras simultaneously. Her vocabulary was expanding rapidly, and her favorite word, after jazz for Jasper, was home, which she said with the satisfaction of someone who finally understood what the concept meant. The legal proceedings surrounding Knox's prosecution had been handled with extraordinary care for Jasper's well-being, but they had still required him to recount his experiences in formal settings that felt worlds away from the safety of his new life. Crown Prosecutor Sarah Chen had worked tirelessly to create an environment where Jasper could testify via closed-circuit television, allowing him to remain in a comfortable room with supportive adults while facing the cameras rather than his abuser directly. His testimony, when it finally came, had been devastating in its clarity and composure. Speaking in the same matter-of-fact tone he might have used to describe a school assignment, Jasper had recounted months of systematic abuse with a precision that left no room for doubt about Knox's guilt. But more powerful than the details of violence was Jasper's explanation of why he had finally acted to protect Luna. "He was going to hurt her," Jasper had said, his voice steady but his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "She's just a baby. She never did anything wrong. I couldn't let him hurt her just because he was angry about losing money gambling. So I took her somewhere safe, where people would help us. The simplicity of his motivation, a child's absolute conviction that protecting innocence was worth any personal risk, had rendered the courtroom completely silent. Even Knox's defense attorney, who had been prepared to argue for leniency based on his client's financial stress and alcohol problems, seemed to understand that no mitigation could excuse the systematic terrorization of children. Knox's conviction, on multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, and criminal threats, had resulted in a sentence of 8 years in prison, with additional restrictions that would prevent him from contacting the family upon his eventual release. More importantly for Jasper and Luna's long-term security, the conviction had legally severed Knox's connection to their family, eliminating any possibility that he might someday claim parental rights or attempt to reinsert himself into their lives. Vivian's journey toward recovery had been longer and more complicated than the legal proceedings against Knox. The court-mandated rehabilitation program had forced her to confront not only her prescription drug dependency, but also the ways in which her absence had enabled Knox's abuse. The process of reducing her medication intake under medical supervision had been physically and emotionally difficult, but it had also allowed her to think clearly about her children's experiences for the first time in months. Her first supervised visit with Jasper and Luna had taken place 6 weeks after their removal from the home, in a family services facility designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional. Jasper's reaction to seeing his mother had been complex, love and longing, warring with anger and disappointment, his mature understanding of her failures competing with his child's need for maternal comfort. "Why didn't you protect us?" he had asked, his voice small but direct, cutting straight to the heart of what needed to be addressed. "Why didn't you see what Knox was doing to us?" Vivian's response had been honest in a way that was painful for everyone present. "I was sick, love," she had said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her son's careful posture and Luna's easy comfort with strangers. "The medicine made me sick, and I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I failed you both, and I'm so sorry." The visits had continued on a carefully structured schedule, with Vivian demonstrating her commitment to recovery and her growing understanding of her children's needs. She had enrolled in parenting classes, attended therapy sessions focused on addiction and codependency, and slowly rebuilt the basic life skills that prescription drug abuse had eroded. But she also understood that rebuilding trust with her children would be a process measured in years rather than months. "I want to be the mother you both deserve," she had told Jasper during their most recent visit, her voice strong with determination, rather than weak with self-pity. "I know I have to earn that, and I know it might take a long time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes." The Hartwells' decision to pursue adoption had emerged gradually from their recognition that Jasper and Luna needed permanency rather than temporary placement. The children had thrived in their care, developing the kind of secure attachments that would provide a foundation for healthy development throughout their lives. More importantly, Jasper had begun to relax his hypervigilance enough to engage in age-appropriate activities and relationships. His enrollment at Brookside Primary School had marked another milestone in his recovery. Freed from the exhaustion of constant caregiving responsibilities and the distraction of physical pain from regular beatings, Jasper's natural intelligence had flourished in ways that amazed his teachers. He was reading at a level several years above his age group, showed exceptional mathematical reasoning abilities, and demonstrated the kind of emotional maturity that made him a natural leader among his peers. Mrs. Penelope Bramwell, his former teacher who had recognized the warning signs of abuse, had requested permission to visit Jasper in his new school environment. The meeting had been emotional for both of them. She carried guilt for not acting more decisively on her suspicions, while he felt the need to reassure her that she had not failed him. "You were kind to me when nobody else was paying attention," Jasper had told her, his words carrying wisdom beyond his years. "That mattered, even when I couldn't tell you what was really happening. It helped me remember that not all adults were dangerous." Luna's first birthday celebration had taken place in the Hartwells' garden on a sunny April afternoon, surrounded by the kind of joyful chaos that characterized healthy family gatherings. She had approached her smash cake with the enthusiasm of someone who had learned that good things could be trusted, covering herself in chocolate frosting, while Jasper laughed and took pictures with the camera Benedict had given him as an early birthday present. The sight of Luna's uninhibited joy, her complete comfort with messiness and noise and adult attention, had been particularly moving for the social workers and therapists who understood how different her development might have been if she had remained in Knox's household. Children who experienced trauma in their first year often struggled with basic trust and attachment throughout their lives, but Luna showed every sign of secure, healthy bonding with her new family. "She doesn't remember the fear," Dr. Sterling had observed during one of their sessions, watching Luna toddle confidently between Hazel and Benedict, while Jasper supervised with protective but relaxed attention. "Her earliest memories are being formed now, in safety and love. That's an extraordinary gift that Jasper gave her by having the courage to seek help." The adoption proceedings had moved forward with the support of all relevant parties, including Vivian, who recognized that her children's security required stability she was not yet able to provide. Her consent to the adoption had been freely given, motivated by maternal love rather than legal pressure, and accompanied by arrangements that would allow her to maintain a relationship with Jasper and Luna as they grew up. "I want them to know that I love them," she had explained to the family court judge during the final hearing. "I want them to understand that giving my permission for this adoption isn't about abandoning them. It's about making sure they have the family they deserve, while I continue working to become the mother they deserve." 8 months after that desperate February night, Jasper was standing in the Hartwell's garden on a warm October afternoon, watching Luna navigate the stepping stones that led to the playground Benedict had built specifically for her enjoyment. She moved with the confident determination of a 16-month-old who trusted completely in her environment and the adults who supervised her exploration. "Careful, Luna Bug," Jasper called softly, his voice holding the gentle authority of a loving, big brother rather than the desperate protection of a surrogate parent. "Take your time with the wobbly stone." Luna looked back at him with a grin that lit up her entire face, babbling something that might have been jazz help, before returning her attention to the challenge of the stepping stones. When she wobbled slightly on the third stone, both Jasper and Benedict moved instinctively to spot her, but she regained her balance independently and continued with the triumph of someone mastering a new skill. The playground was a masterpiece of thoughtful design, safe enough for a toddler to explore independently, challenging enough to encourage development, and positioned where Luna could always see the adults who had become her security base. Benedict had spent weeks researching child development principles and safety standards, creating a space that would grow with Luna while providing endless opportunities for the kind of play that built both physical skills and emotional confidence. "She's getting so independent," Hazel observed from the kitchen window, where she was preparing dinner with the relaxed efficiency of someone who had learned to balance multiple children's needs without crisis. "Hard to believe this is the same baby who wouldn't let Jasper out of her sight for the first month." Jasper heard the comment and felt a surge of pride mixed with wistful recognition of how much their lives had changed. Luna's growing independence was healthy and appropriate, but it also marked the end of his role as her primary protector. Learning to celebrate her development rather than feeling displaced by it had been one of the most challenging aspects of his own healing journey. "She's brave," he said, settling on the garden bench where he could watch Luna's progress while staying close enough to help if needed. "She's not afraid of anything anymore." The observation was accurate and profound. Luna had indeed become fearless in the way that children could be when they trusted their environment completely. She approached new experiences with curiosity rather than caution, sought comfort from multiple adults rather than clinging exclusively to Jasper, and showed the kind of social confidence that came from secure attachment relationships. Dr. Sterling had explained that Luna's resilience was partly due to her age during the trauma. She had been too young to form lasting memories of fear, but also reflected the quality of care she had received from Jasper during those difficult months. His protection had allowed her to develop normally despite their dangerous circumstances, and his continued love provided continuity as she adapted to their new family structure. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, Luna completed her navigation of the stepping stones with a victory dance that involved spinning in circles until she collapsed, giggling onto the soft grass. Jasper applauded enthusiastically, his laughter mixing with hers in a sound that represented everything their new life had made possible: joy without reservation, play without fear, childhood reclaimed from the darkness that had threatened to destroy it. Benedict emerged from his workshop with a wooden puzzle he had been crafting for Luna's upcoming Christmas present, while Hazel called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready in 15 minutes. These ordinary domestic rhythms, the predictable flow of family life organized around children's needs, had become precious to Jasper in their very mundaneness. "Time to come in, Luna Bug," Jasper called, rising from the bench to help gather her toys. "Mama Hazel has dinner ready, and you know how hungry you get when you've been playing hard." Luna's response was to run toward him with arms outstretched, secure in the knowledge that he would catch her and swing her around in the way that always made her laugh. The game was a newer addition to their repertoire. During their months of crisis, Jasper had been too injured and too stressed for physical play. But now he could lift his sister purely for fun, rather than survival. As they walked toward the house together, Luna chattering about her conquest of the stepping stones while Jasper listened with the patient attention that had always characterized their relationship, the scene represented everything that courage and love and proper adult intervention could accomplish. Two children who might have been destroyed by the violence they experienced had instead found their way to safety, healing, and the kind of family bonds that would sustain them throughout their lives. The legal system had held Knox accountable for his crimes. Vivian was working toward becoming the mother her children deserved. The Hartwells had provided the stability and love that allowed healing to flourish. But at the center of it all was the extraordinary courage of a 7-year-old boy who had chosen to carry his baby sister 6 blocks through a winter night, rather than accept that violence was their destiny. Inside the warm kitchen, as Hazel served dinner and Benedict asked about their afternoon adventures, Jasper looked around the table at the faces of his new family and felt something he had never experienced before: complete security. Luna was babbling happily in her high chair, occasionally offering him bites of her food with the generosity of someone who had never known hunger. The adults were discussing weekend plans that included activities designed around the children's interests and development. "Next week we'll start looking at schools for next year," Hazel mentioned, referring to the secondary school applications that would determine Jasper's educational path. "Mr. Harrison at Brookside thinks you'd thrive in their accelerated mathematics program." The conversation continued around topics that represented normal family planning: education, extracurricular activities, holiday traditions they wanted to establish. For Jasper, who had spent months making life and death decisions, while other children worried about homework and playground politics, the luxury of discussing his future in terms of opportunities rather than survival felt almost surreal. As bedtime approached, the evening routine unfolded with the calm predictability that had become one of Jasper's favorite aspects of their new life. Luna's bath time was filled with splashing and laughter rather than hurried efficiency. Her bedtime story was chosen for entertainment rather than distraction from household dangers. Most importantly, when Jasper tucked her into her cot and whispered his traditional "Good night, Luna Bug," it was with the certainty that morning would bring more safety rather than new threats. "Jazz," Luna said clearly, one of her expanding vocabulary words, reaching through the cot rails to touch his hand before settling down to sleep. "I'm right here," he assured her, settling into the comfortable chair beside her cot. Not because he needed to maintain protective vigilance, but because he genuinely enjoyed these quiet moments before sleep. "I'll always be right here." Luna's peaceful descent into sleep was accompanied by the distant sounds of Hazel and Benedict cleaning up from dinner, their quiet conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. Through the window, Birmingham's lights twinkled in the darkness. But this time they represented not a dangerous journey through unknown streets, but the warm glow of a city where children could sleep safely in homes where they were cherished as... Jasper prepared for his own bedtime, changing into pajamas that fit properly, and brushing his teeth with the thoroughness Hazel had taught him. He caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror. The reflection showed a boy who still carried wisdom beyond his years, but whose eyes had lost the haunted wariness that had characterized his appearance during the months of abuse. His body had filled out with proper nutrition and the absence of stress, and his posture no longer suggested someone prepared to absorb blows. The transformation was not complete. Healing from complex trauma was a process that would continue for years, supported by therapy and the patient love of adults, who understood that recovery required time. But the foundation had been laid for a life defined by possibility rather than survival, by trust rather than fear, by the knowledge that seeking help when needed was a sign of strength rather than failure. In his comfortable bed, surrounded by books and toys and all the normal accumulations of childhood, Jasper allowed himself to remember the night 8 months ago when he had made the decision that changed everything. The memory no longer brought panic or regret, but rather a quiet pride in the courage he had found when it mattered most. He had protected Luna. He had sought help when no help seemed possible, and he had been strong enough to accept the love and support that followed. Luna's soft breathing from the cot beside his bed provided the soundtrack for his descent into sleep. Not the vigilant half-consciousness of someone listening for danger, but the deep, restorative rest of a child who trusted completely in his safety. Tomorrow would bring school and friends and the ordinary challenges of growing up in a family where love was expressed through consistent care rather than dramatic gestures. The boy who had carried his baby sister through winter streets to save. Her life had become a child who could play in gardens, laugh at jokes, and dream about futures filled with education and opportunity, and all the possibilities that opened up when survival was no longer the primary concern. And Luna, the baby who had been protected by her brother's extraordinary courage, was growing into a confident toddler who approached the world with fearless joy because she had learned that love could be trusted absolutely. In the quiet darkness of their shared room, surrounded by the sounds of a peaceful household settling into night, Jasper whispered a final, "Good night, Luna Bug," and closed his eyes on another day in their new life. A life made possible by courage, sustained by love, and protected by adults who understood that keeping children safe was not just a professional obligation, but a sacred trust. The nightmare was over. The healing would continue, and their future stretched ahead bright with promise, built on the unshakable foundation of a love that had been strong enough to carry them both to safety.